Hello and welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christine Marie, and I am so happy to have you here with us tonight. I'm going to be talking about something that's very much so on my mind right now. I actually just at dinner tonight, my sisters and I were talking about the definition of marriage, and my youngest, or actually the one in between the youngest and I, she mentioned that she and her boyfriend are coming from a very similar upbringing, and therefore their terms and definitions are very similar. So they're effectively approaching life with a similar lens. And I want to talk about this aspect when it comes to relational differences, because and what sparked this topic for me was our dinner conversation, and I'll kind of like dive into that a little bit more soon, because I respect both of my younger sisters, and it was such a good conversation. For those of you who don't know, I am currently at sea in the Mediterranean. We'll be in Santorini tomorrow. I'm so excited to go back and experience it with my family. I came to Greece for 10 days last year, but I was alone. So I'm really excited. I told somebody while I was flying over here, and I was like, I feel like I'm a kid again. I just feel so excited to be with my parents and be with my sisters. And it's just really proven to be a meaningful, wonderful time. And the topic of our conversations, for the most part, always ebb and flow between just laughing together and then getting into some really deep conversations. And tonight we were talking about the meaning of marriage, and what does that look like. I'm coming from um I guess you could say a failed marriage, and both of them have existed in very long-term relationships over 4 years, and they both ended. And um and so we've just been kind of analyzing this question together of what does it look like to exist in relationship, and do so in a way that's healthy, in a way that's life-giving, in a way that is frankly in alignment with our own values and ideals. And then the question is not just me looking at what does this look like from my perspective, but what even is it? Because in one sense, there's these universal aspects of what something is defined as that's handed to us that frankly should have never been the case at all. But we all kind of operate and kind of mold and form under this definition that is offered to us, when frankly that's really far from what that actually was intended to be in the first place. 2 weeks ago, I actually had my brother on the show, Jared Hoffman, and we talked about this very thing in a different guise. We were talking about how definitions of words that were intended to be something completely different have changed and morphed over centuries and millennia to mean something today that the genesis of the word and the intention thereof was so vastly different. And y'all, that is so dangerous. Even, taking this concept of what does this mean and drawing it out even further. Us talking about relationships at dinner tonight, my brother being on the show 2 weeks ago, talking about some religious terms and how they show up in biblical text and how we've interpreted it. And it's vastly different than the intention. Even to the point of, I was hosting a knowing retreat in Vegas months ago. Two couples were there. And I asked everyone to define, what does love mean? And both couples, both parties in the relationship, came forward with very different definitions of love. How can we ever expect to operate in in peace, in alignment, when we're fundamentally operating from very different modes, from very different foundations, from ultimately a very different lens through which we see the world? And therefore we have to ask this question of, okay, well, what's the definition? And I thought it was so interesting, because when my youngest sister made that comment of, my boyfriend and I have her current boyfriend, so the previous one she dated, almost for 5 years, so very, very long-term relationship, really gave it a very good shot. And it was effectively like, okay, we've got to pull the plug on this. It's not healthy nor safe on an emotional or physical level. So she pulled the plug on that. And so we've all talked, my husband was the one to decide that marriage should end. And simultaneously, I had come to him and said, "Hey, I'd like for our marriage to become an emotionally safe place for me to exist." And I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew that it was good and right for the whole person to be emotionally and cognitively activated. I had put so much honor and emphasis on the IQ for so much of my marriage that as I was learning about the EQ and realizing, man, there's something here on an emotional level that I need to tap into and honor. Okay, darling husband, can we bring this into our marriage? And it wasn't welcomed or wanted, and so he ended up leaving. But as I was talking with my sisters, okay, what does marriage mean to you? When is it right and good for us to pursue marriage within this certain confines, and what does that even mean versus other relationships that frankly we have all moved in and out of? So what's the difference there? And it all comes down to this concept of what is the definition of it. But as I think about that concept, I think about the very fact that everybody else has defined this word for me, and the fact that everyone also isn't necessarily super happy with it. Y'all, I have spoken to so many people who have existed in relationship and they really are not very happy. I've talked to there have been three different individuals in 3 weeks that have either talked to me or come to me asking for hosting a knowing retreat because their marriage, they're either in the process of getting divorced or thinking about divorce. And I've just been thinking more and more about this, y'all, that there needs to be a better way, and there needs to be just a re-examination of what does this even mean. Someone very close to me is in a relationship right now that is just eating them alive because the other party is so unhealthy. And so how do we coexist in relationship when the other person that we're attached to is so unwell? And when I say unwell, I mean that wounded child is in the driver's seat. And y'all, every single one of us ebbs and flows in and out of the driver's seat. That wounded child coming in, coming out. And I was even laying in bed thinking about this last night, that I have to, with intention, bring my kind of like my true self, like who God made me to be. I have to intentionally activate that person, or else I wake up and that wounded child is kind of automatically in the driver's seat because of either a dream I had or something that I don't like. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, man, I am just feeling, man, I know when I'm feeling aligned, and it is a powerful, beautiful, magical thing. And there are other mornings where I wake up and I'm just like, oh, okay, I have to activate that part of me that is almost, and this is why I love dedicating Sundays to the spiritual intelligence, because there is something about considering, and I actually, let's dive into this. I've never talked about this on the show. I have heard many Stoics talk about this concept, and I really, really like it. It's the concept that effectively there's this kind of pure, true self in us that is created by the divine, created by God, made in his likeness. And there's this part of us. And that true part is like preserved and beautiful, and the integrity and purity of it is unaffected by the world. And it's kind of like always there. But as we grow up and start experiencing more of our even our parents kind of bringing their own baggage, our friends bringing new types of information that maybe isn't good or right or helpful or encouraging, all of a sudden we get kind of layers and layers and layers and layers, and that true self can get buried in childhood with all these layers of pain, or even just like we learn behaviors that are selfish, and we learn aspects that are really not kind and not good, and we start kind of having these layers grow from our true self. And I think of this as, when Michelangelo was asked how he created David, he effectively gave the answer as, I removed everything who David was not, and effectively I found David beneath the layers of stone. Y'all, that is our true self beneath all of our layers of crap. And I don't even want to say crap, because I think that there's really beautiful aspects there. Like our parents raise us for a reason because of their layers and their childhood experiences. Someone who was on the Craft and Calling show 2 weeks ago, Mike Abramowitz, he said, I am intentionally raising my children not to survive the childhood I had, but I need to teach them a new way of effectively existing. Because for so many years, before he had actually done the work to remove his own layers, he was just handing down these traumas generationally because of what he experienced, because his dad experienced it. So, unless we do the work to shed and remove these layers of what's been handed to us by our parents and by our teachers, even every single person in our life since we were a child has handed us something that we've added on. And all of a sudden, it's like this little person wearing thick layers of coats that you can't even see that little person. And over the years, as we start doing the work, it's like we take off the outer coat, and then we take off the next coat, and then we take off the next one, and we just start shedding layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And then eventually we're just getting closer and closer and closer to that true self that's there. And these layers are not just added in childhood, but they're added in adulthood, in adolescence, at any point in our life. Tonight, I could have added a layer. Every single one of us is adding or having the ability to take off a layer at any given point of our life. And so the question is, am I intentionally removing to get closer and honing in on, okay, this is who I was created to be? Or am I actually adding more on there, or not even recognizing there are layers there in the first place? So when we talk about this concept of like our true self, it's that person underneath all those layers, having that person be alive and awake and aware, and they're the ones calling the shots, the very one that was made in the image and then the likeness of our creator, rather than the little kid wearing all the coats with all these layers on them. It's like, of course, they're not going to make a good decision, because if I'm wearing all these layers of clothes, I'm actually not going to have the agility to move quickly. I'm not going to even have the ability to even hear clearly, because I've got all these layers that I'm hearing through. Like if I'm wearing dozens and dozens of hats, I actually don't have clarity to be able to hear with accuracy, with the purity and integrity of what the other person was saying to me in the first place. I actually can't hear it because it's being funneled through layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. Every single experience that we have that is unprocessed, every single narrative that was handed to us, every single little trauma, whether it's a capital T trauma or a little t trauma, every single one adds a layer to us. And then through those layers, we perceive and interact with the world. And so the question is, how many layers am I wearing? How many do I need to remove and shed? How many am I even aware of? Like, obviously, I'm not going to be operating perfectly every single day, sans all the layers. But the fact that I'm aware of them gives me an upper hand than if I'm just being like my true self is actually existing subconscious. And that outer layer, 10 layers deep, is the one calling the shots. That's really dangerous. And so, as we work to shed the layers, and as we work to kind of hone in and come closer to this true self as we were created to be in the first place, that is what, man, that's what knowing is all about. It's knowing the layers, it's knowing how to remove them, it's knowing what change is necessary to break free from them so that we can then operate in our true self. And here's what's cool: once we've removed all the layers, once we kind of come back to our basic, once we come down to our true self as we were created to be, then we can start creating. Then we can start with intention, creating new layers, or adding to the beautiful true self that's there. We can create the environment that we're in. We can create the life that we live. We can create the day. We can create all the beautiful. It's like recreating Eden around us. In the very first chapter of the Bible, there's this story about Eden, where the very first person to ever exist lives in this land that's just absolutely beautiful. There's no corruption. There's nothing corroding the purity of the beauty that's there. And it's flowers and gardens and animals, and it's just absolutely stunning. And, this is truly the metaphor for the perfect world. And so once we can return to our true self, then we can start creating in the world around us. But it's going to forever be corroded if we're trying to create through the layers. Our layers will constantly be blocking us and constantly getting in the way, so that what we're touching and what we're trying to create ultimately is colored by that which is layered from other people on top of us. So then our creation in and of itself is never pure. It's always infiltrated by some other baggage, some other layer that was handed to us age 5, 15, even 50. Every single one of us has the opportunity to be a creator, because, after all, we're made in the image of the greatest creator himself. So, therefore, we are a creator. And we also have the opportunity to have complete and ultimate autonomy over that, not only that which we create, but also everything uh, that could be getting in the way of. I think I lost my connection, but I think I'm back. I y'all this conversation was really sparked by this idea that I had earlier as I was thinking about this topic. I've thought a lot about, when it comes to my true self. And then I think about this environment that we get to create as when I become creator, what does it look like to create the world around me? And that's my ideal. My ideal is the person that I am, the environment in which I live. And I thought about this moments before I jumped on, and man, it really excited me. And it really, even now as I'm processing it, I'm like, man, this is an entire framework. And I really need to dive into this over the next couple of days. I have my own ideal for who I want to be, but I've never thought about what is my ideal for how I want to be treated. I've never thought about that. I've never, like, maybe I've thought about it a little bit, but never have I put much intention or care or thought into this concept of what is my ideal for how they treat me? What is my ideal for how they engage with me? How do I want to be treated? And I have just always viewed the world through either how I can serve, how I can give. And most recently, I've been learning, okay, well, what do I want? What do I need? But now it's like, oh my gosh, that next level, which is, how do I want to be treated? What does respect look like? I, y'all, it's so important that we know the answer to that question. We need to know what we want in terms of how to teach others how to love us. We need to know what we want in terms of how we want others to engage with us, because otherwise, people are just going to be shooting shots in the dark. And then we're like, oh, that landed, by the way. I like that. Okay, keep shooting. Or it can be like, hey, by the way, here's how you can love me well. Hey, by the way, this is what I really need, and this is what I want to be loved. This is how you can win. Every single thing we do is effectively a game. Every single thing we do in terms of creating, man, what a beautiful thing. My best friend calls it a sandbox. Every time we're creating, we're playing. It's a sandbox. We're creating. It's not some big, man, important thing. Oh, I'm gonna go on stage and I've got to give this speech. Oh my gosh. It's like, no, we're playing in a sandbox. We're figuring it out as we go. And man, life is not that solemn and that even important in one sense, like, what is the worst that can happen if you bomb it on stage? Really, play it out in your head. I asked someone that the other week. We were having a one-to-one session, and I said, what is the worst that could happen if the very thing that you're so deeply afraid of, that keeps you from living so small, and living from being so in your power, so living in alignment with that person that you feel like you're called to be, what happens if that fear is actualized? And when we play it out on almost every single occasion, we realize, oh man, it actually isn't that scary. It's really not that big of a deal. But we have to actualize and visualize what is our ideal, not just for ourselves in terms of how we engage with ourselves, like how do I want to live? How do I want to be? What do I want to do? But how do I want to be treated? Because y'all, apart from answering that question, man, no one in our lives is ever truly going to be set up for success in terms of how they engage with us. And that is radical responsibility. I realize this, I my current boyfriend and I, we have SOPs for our relationship. We have different kind of systems in place for how we engage with each other, and it's so helpful. And it's so helpful that each one of those SOPs, and I'm realizing this now as I'm really diving into this, every single one of those SOPs needs to account for every single one of our intelligences. He and I could both show up with our IQ fully activated. Cognitively, we're there, but emotionally, man, we are so far. We're preoccupied with something else. We're actually emotionally upset about something to do with something completely different. Spiritually, maybe we didn't get aligned that morning, and frankly, one of us feels a little bit further off from what the truth is or not. And then physically, man, we just haven't been eating well, sleeping well. So yes, cognitively, I'm fully present. And our SOPs, this is what's so interesting as I reflect on what our SOPs are right now. All of our SOPs have so much to do with the intellectual. And both of us are highly, highly optimized in the IQ. Like that is the most cultivated intelligence for both of us. And we're working to cultivate the others. So, therefore, our SOPs, our standard operating procedures for how we engage with each other, reflect that. And so, when I think about, okay, what's my ideal for how I want him to treat me? What is his ideal for how he wants me to treat him? And then, how do the SOPs need to reflect that in both regards to protect us both? And how do they also inform and guide each one of our intelligences in the way we show up in that engagement and in that relationship? It's so helpful once we actually have this framework of like, okay, there's these intelligences. There's my intellectual, my IQ, my mind, my brain. There's my emotional state, my EQ. There's the spiritual, which is the pathway to the divine. There's just kind of like this otherworldly aspect on the spiritual side, my intuition, that which I just know and I can't explain it. The physical, that is the most practical, realistic intelligence that really truly has something to tell us if we were to honor it. And so many of us do not honor our physical bodies. And frankly, most of us were trained actually not to. We were trained to dishonor our physical bodies for multitude of reasons. And so therefore there's a lot of shame there for many of us. If we start realizing that every single one of those intelligences must be activated and treated with equilibrium, then when we're starting to create SOPs around our relationship, SOPs around even our own working environments, which is hard to say, and maybe there's not, in terms of equilibrium, that doesn't mean that they're all held with the same honor per se. That might mean that the IQ is 80%. But you have to realize that each one of those other intelligences play a role. Y'all, if you're working with a team and you actually are on the side saying, hey, everybody, we're going to have a fitness challenge leading up to Thanksgiving. We're going to do 20,000 steps every single day leading up to Thanksgiving. I would bet you that team morale will increase, that the productivity would increase. It's all connected. We are not disparate beings from our personal and professional lives, and we're not disparate beings from our inner selves. I cannot come to you fully 100% intellectually present while my emotional self is completely in rubbish over back there about something in the past. There is no way I will operate in my full prowess and potential if all of me is not fully present and healthy. The and healthy piece is very, very important to incorporate. So therefore, we have to be incorporating these aspects of not just, okay, what's my ideal for me, but what is my ideal in terms of how they engage with me? We have to be doing this work. We have to outline what is it that I want? What is it that I dream of? What is right? Because that's a whole other thing. What I want may not be what is right for right now. Maybe what I want is actually right for 5 years from now? Knowing that, and there's so much freedom and so excitement there, considering that what I want and what's like on my heart could not be for now. It might actually be for 15, 20 years from now once I'm hopefully done having kids and in the, I don't know, old mom stage. I don't know, but there's so many things I love. There's so many things that excite me, that interest me. And the more I really come to know myself, the more I'm like, yeah, I could see pursuing that. I could see pursuing that. And it could be what I want, but not for right now. So knowing and having each one of these intelligences activated and online is going to help bring what we want into perspective in terms of timing, in terms of prioritization, and then also having the ideal, not just for who we want to be and who we show up as, but also for how we treated, serves as a safeguard for how we exist on a lateral level. And y'all, I'll tell you, I haven't been strong there. My vertical has been historically, but even in the past couple of months, there's been dissonance there from the horizontal. Like, man, do I honor me, invest in me, all these things vertically, but then when I show up horizontally, it's like I don't really know how to engage as well on the horizontal plane, and I've really been focusing on cultivating that over the last 12 to 18 months, and it's been so good and so hard. And tonight I realized I need to have a standard for how I want to be treated, because otherwise I'm going to repeat history. Otherwise, I'm setting them up for failure because they don't know what the target is. Y'all, it is so loving. It is so loving when we are taking and assuming radical responsibility for ourselves to know what is true for ourselves in terms of what we want, what we value, so that then we can communicate it to somebody else and say, hey, would you love me this way? That's probably one of the most responsible things, and also one of the most vulnerable things, because we might not get it. And then that is when we don't get it, it's okay, well, what is my ideal for how I want to behave? How then will I live? This question of how then will I live when I am faced with disappointment, when I'm faced with devastation, when I'm faced with heartbreak, when I'm faced with loss. How then will I live? How then will I live when I'm getting everything I want? How then will I live when I'm recognized by the person at the top of the hierarchy? How then will I live when I'm feeling so rich and full? That's been a question that this idea of success and this idea of being just thriving actually has been something I've been afraid of, because I've never actually visualized, well, how then would I live if everything was going well? I actually have found myself over the last probably, well, decade, 11 years, ever since my brother-in-law died, I've gotten so familiar and acquainted with grief that for everything to be going well, there was an element where it was like, what is this feeling? And what does this mean? And does this mean I don't care about my brother-in-law who was killed, or does this mean I'm healed from my husband, leaving me? So this idea of allowing for joy to be our teacher, and allowing for joy to actually be something that can coexist in our lives, we need to answer this question of how then will I live under the guise of my ideal, under the guise of not getting what we want. But we have to know it in order to allow for our ideal to even be attempted, both in terms of by our own efforts, but also by the efforts of others. So truly, it is the most loving thing in the world to assume radical responsibility, to know the truth, and then to communicate it. And then address the question of how then will I live if I get it and if I don't.